Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. So this is Peah chapter 6, Halacha 4. Now, there's a few things going on here. We're going to get into an explanation here on how is Bet Shammai coming up with 3 sheaves and how is Hillel coming up with 2 sheaves in a row. They're both going to derive it in the actual scripture, and they're going to show us how they're reading the text and interpreting it to get to 2 or 3. That's really going to be amazing. And also, we're going to talk about a little bit about shkika here, about 2 different topics. One is going to be with trees as well, and then we're going to talk about stalks of flax. Now, stalks of flax is something that is left in the Shas as a signal. Whenever it's talking about stalks of flax, anywhere in Masechet Zerayim, anywhere in the Shas, what it's trying to teach us is the following thing: that flax, it can be used for clothes. They used to grow it for the stalks and then beat the stalks and make it into a fiber that they used to weave to make the clothing. And in fact, that was for the garment, also for the Kohen Gadol. So that's a non-food situation for that. So when it's talking about stalks of flax, it'll be talking about, hey, you could be growing it for seed, so that you could be using that seed to grow more flax to make more clothes. But also, flax is also something that they use for food. So it's there as a signal to show you, hey, pay attention here, because this is one of these crops that's not only used for food, it might be used for the other thing. And it's showing, hey, which was the intention. It's a signal here showing, hey, which was the intention for what they're using. By the way, there's 4 rivers that run from the Garden of Eden in Berechot. One of them is the Pishon, and the Midrash Rabbah in Berechot says that the Pishon is like Pishton, which is flax, and what it's really trying to signify is that there's a richness that's coming out of each of these 4 rivers, and that in the first of the 4 rivers, the Pishon, that is signifying a richness in growing, not only for basically for clothing, but also for agricultural things. So there's a deep connection there with actually in Bereshit itself. Keep in mind, olives and carobs are they're going to come up in this Mishnah, and they do fit these 5 criteria that we talked about in the Mishnah in chapter 1, which when we were talking about Peah. By the way, in Bavli Hulin 131a, he's also going to talk about trees with shkika. Trees are subject to shkika, and we know that they are that there are 2 types of shkika. There's standing grain, and then there's sheaves, and they also have over there for trees where it can be there in the tree, and the farmer forgets it in the tree, and also it can also be in heaps. They can also do it in heaps. So you have the same application over there, and it's going to talk about olives and carobs. So the Mishnah reads like this: it says, 2 forgotten sheaves are shchichucha, but 3 are not shchichucha. This, by the way, we're going to talk about with Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. They're going to talk about this. Now, if the farmer forgot 2 consecutive sheaves, by the way, they're both going to be rendered shchichucha. But if he forgot a set of 3 or more consecutive sheaves, they do not become shchichucha, and they remain the property of the owner. That's a key point, and the Rambam echoes that in Hilchos Matanos Aniyim, chapter 5, Halacha 14, and he's saying over there that that in order for a set of 3 sheaves to be excluded from shchichucha, the sheaves must be distinct and separate from one another. So that's what we've been talking about so far in chapter 6, that what happens when these sheaves end up separated, or they're very, very different from all the other sheaves. and there's something different. So the Gemara reads like this, or the Mishnah reads like this: two forgotten sheaves are shiurim, but three are not shiurim. Two forgotten heaps of olives and carobs are shiurim, but three are not shiurim. So that's important to put in there because it's connecting between piles of grain and piles of olives and carobs. One comes from the ground and one is coming from a tree. And it's really trying to show you that just like the laws of piles of olives is literally the same as for sheaves of grain, they're the same for things that are growing as stalks out of the ground, just like for trees. Very important that it puts it in there because we wouldn't be sure of that. Gemara gets into flax now. It says, or Mishnah gets into flax. It says, two forgotten stalks of flax are shiurim, but three are not shiurim. Now, keep in mind, this is referring to a bundle of cut flax, and the Mishnah is going to refer to flax that was planted here for edible seeds, and when it's produced the seeds. But again, it's putting in these three categories: putting in grain, it's putting in things from the trees like the olives and carobs, and now it's putting in this thing that hey, which is it? Is it going to be used for food or is it going to be used for clothing, and fiber and rope and things like that? So when it's saying this in this way, where it echoes the same rule for trees and grain, it's showing that it was produced for seed. And by the way, non-food plants are not ever subject to the law of shiurim. So they used to have a dye called woad. It makes things blue. It's not the same as techelet. It's a different color. But in the Shas, it'll talk about woad a lot. And actually, it's very famous. They had barbarians in Britain, and they used to dye themselves with woad so that they would be blue, and they would make themselves very scary when they would be fighting the Romans and things like that. And actually, there are Roman records that show that they were afraid of this woad, these woad blue people that were fighting them very ferociously. And things like that with woad, and if you're growing the flax for clothes, it's not a food crop. And it wasn't designated as a food crop. Even if you change your mind, that's gonna be a question you have to look up, but it still might be where the original designation could stand in some cases. In some cases, it would still be subject, but in some cases, it might not be subject. So the issue of changing your mind once you're growing it for clothes and then change it for seed, that you have to check. But if it's definite for stalks of flax that is going to be for seed, then yeah, it is subject to shiurim, and three are not subject to shiurim, and that's why it's putting in stalks of flax here in the Mishnah, and it's very precise. It's trying to show you that there's a symmetry here between the grain and the trees and this other produce that could be used either for either purpose. But one of the things that we see here and we know is that things that are not used for food at all is not going to be subject to shiurim. So it's also not explicitly saying it, but when you look at why flax, that's what it's also showing. So Mishnah continues, says, two fallen grapes are parrot, but three are not parrot. Parrot, by the way, these are grapes that drop from a cluster, and it's being cut off the vine. And these, by the way, in the Torah, it does belong to the poor. And it's teaching that if three grapes fell simultaneously, it's not parrot, and it's kept by the owner. But if it's one or two grapes, then that is the property of the poor once it falls. It continues. So now we're talking about, in the symmetry, we're talking about things of the vine. And the Gemara continues. It says, two fallen ears of grain are leket, but three are not leket. So there's a symmetry there showing between this rule of 2 and 3 and for shiurim and leket. And then the Mishnah continues, says these rulings are in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel, but concerning all of them, Bet Shammai says these 3 belong to the poor and 4 belong to the owner. Now, keep in mind that Bet Shammai is maintaining that for Shkicha, Peret, and Leket, a set of 3 is awarded to the poor, and only 4 more is retained by the owner. Now, we're going to get into the reasoning behind this from Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel, and when I was looking at this to review for this year, I was really amazed at the beauty and the richness of how Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai are deriving this out of Scripture. I found it really amazing. So the Gemara is going to start, and it says the Gemara is going to present this inquiry, this question regarding the Mishnah's first ruling that 3 consecutive sheaves that were forgotten do not become shchicha. Gemara reads like this. It says, Rabbi Bon Barhia related the following inquiry to Rabbi Yochanan. It says, if one had arranged 3 sheaves perpendicularly in the form of the Greek letter gamma. Now, a gamma is, if you imagine an uppercase letter L, and then you turn it, and then you turn it. That's basically so that it's like at a right angle. That's going to be the shape of a gamma. You can look up what a gamma looks like. So you're talking about this. I mean, the Gemara has been talking about this real world problem because in the act of harvesting, you're bundling it into sheaves so it doesn't blow by the wind, and that it doesn't get trampled on, doesn't get lost in the work process. And then at some point you have to pick up these sheaves. Now, you have this strange arrangement where for whatever reason they put it in the Greek letter gamma. It's not in a straight line. That's basically what it's trying to tell us. And basically these sheaves are going to be forgotten. That's what the Gemara asks, what is the law? Gemara asks, what is the law? In other words, the Mishnah is asking, does this exemption apply only when the 3 sheaves are in a straight row, or does it apply when the sheaves are arranged where you have this right angle formation? And you could look at it like, hey, maybe this is a row of 2 and a row of 1. And so you could look at it in terms of, hey, there are 3 that are connected. Or you could look at it and say, no, this is one that's out of alignment with the other 2. And for whatever reason, in the picking up, that these row of 3 is not really a row of 3, that they picked up 1 over here and left 2 here. And they picked up 2 over here and left 1 over here. So that's really what they're asking here. Now, the Beurim of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in Safe 127, he's understanding Rabbi Yochanan to be issuing a definitive statement rather than a question. And Rabbi Yochanan is asserting that although the 3-sheaf exemption does not apply when the forgotten sheaves are situated in close proximity to one another, the exemption is applicable when the sheaves are arranged in a gamma-shaped formation, for then, even if the sheaves were touching one another, they are readily discernible as 3 separate entities. So that's how Rabbi Moshe Feinstein reads this. I want to point out how the Vilna Goan reads it, because it's a little bit different. The Vilna Goan is saying that Rabbi Yochanan's statement is misplaced in the text and it actually belongs in the end of the previous halacha. He's maintaining that there's actually a scribal error here and that it's in the wrong section. And he's basically saying that the Gemara citation of the Beresheit regarding a field whose sheaves were in disarray, he's understanding Rabbi Yochanan as explaining, and by the way, you can find this in the Vilna Gaon's Derech Amuna, chapter 5, halacha 48, is explaining that a sheaf forgotten in a disarrayed field is rendered shchicha as soon as 2 sheaves on the neighboring sides, in other words, one in the north and one in the east, is removed, and the Beresheit does not require all the surrounding sheaves to be removed in order for shchicha to apply. So, if you're reading it like how the Vilna Gaon's reading it, and you're putting it in the last case where it's talking about a disheveled field where there's sheaves all around, and you're talking about this thing in a right angle, you could look at it like where it is rendered shkikaka because you're basically taking one out of a row and two out of another row. And according to, if you're going to leave it here in this Gemara here, and this statement by Rabbi Yochanan, you could read it like Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, where it's not a question, and it would be exempt from shkika. So that really does answer two questions if you're going to look at it. If you're going to look at it like the Vilna Goan, you're going to put it over there, then you can say, hey, wait a second. If you have this disheveled field and you're taking away sheaves in a way where you've left this odd letter gamma L shaped thing that's whatever, then you basically have, once in this disarrayed field, you've rendered it shkika as soon as the two sheaves on the neighboring sides have been removed. And basically what the Vilna Gaon's pointing out in his point is that the Brisa does not require that all the surrounding sheaves be removed for the shkika to apply. But if you're going to read it like the way that Rabbi Yochanan is explaining it here in this Mishnah, or this Gemara, and you're not putting it into the last one, then because it's in close proximity to one another, it's still not going to be, the exemption is still going to be applicable, and it's not going to be, even though the sheaves are not touching one another, they're still going to be discernible as three separate entities. And so that it's going to be connected. So that's two different ways to read this, and I think it would be consistent on the halacha depending on where you put it. The Mishnah stated in the second ruling, two forgotten heaps of olives or carobs are shkikha. Now keep in mind there's a debate between Tanaim on whether shkikha is only relating to shkikha and Peah is only related to grapes, olives, and grain, wheat, specifically wheat, not necessarily barley, but wheat. And because the Torah says those three. Now, the question is going to be, hey, wait, is this going to be a hekesh that these three things are applied to all other things that are similar? For instance, what about barley, right? Or what about flax that's going to be used for seed, for food? So the question then is going to be, hey, is shkika and peah going to be doraita for other kinds of things like carobs, or is it going to be derabanan? Now, even though it's derabanan, you still have to do it. So if you have a carob tree, guess what? You're piling it up and you forget a pile, and it's in these arrangements, just like we were talking about. You have rows of three and another row of three, and you start separating and taking away, and you leave one, and you turn your back, and you created a pile that now has been forgotten. That belongs to the poor. So you still have to follow it, even if it's derabanan. But we're not sure if these things like the carobs are going to be doraita or derabanan. We're not sure. It's Malochet, Tanayim, and we don't have the answer for it. But nonetheless, you still have to do it. You still have to leave the shkika and the peah for the carobs. So that's another point to put it out here, whether rather than wading into this debate of whether it's going to be shkika or not, he's basically putting in this other category. It's not only trees, but he's putting in this other type of product that could be interpreted as being derabanan. Nonetheless, you still have to do it. So he's basically saying, two forgotten heaps of olives or carobs are shkika. You have to leave it, whether it's derabanan or doraita. So that's another way to look at this Mishnah and this Gemara. Gemara notes that when discussing the application of shkika with regards to olives, the Mishnah speaks only of forgotten heaps. The Gemara says this implies that individual olives that were forgotten are not rendered shkika. So we're going to get into an explanation why, but basically this is trying to say that the Mishnah means that the shkika only applies when the farmer forgets to collect one or two heaps of olives while he's gathering the other heaps into a main pile. If he forgets to collect one or two olives, individual olives, when he's forming the intermediary heaps, though, they do not become shchicha. That's another way that they're saying, the Gemara is noting that it's implied. In other words, so let's say you're creating piles, you're getting the stuff out of the tree, and a couple of olives fall. Now, this is different for if a couple of grapes fall, but in terms of olives or carobs, that, by the way, if you are cutting and harvesting the olives, and a couple fall while you're harvesting it, okay, and once it drops, that can be the property of the poor. But this is different. This is, you've already harvested it, right? You've already taken it, you've already cut it, and now you're in the process now of creating this intermediary pile before you bring it to the single pile that you're going to transport to the wine vat, or to the, not wine vat, to the oil vat, where you're going to make all the oil mill, where you're gonna grind it up and you're gonna make it into olive oil. So as you're piling it up, a couple of olives fall over. Who does that belong to? Are you gonna look at it like it's parrot, like a couple of grapes fall? Or are you gonna look at it where, no, this is still the property of the owner, he's just in the process of piling it up? And what this Gemara is trying to point out is that implied in here is that as you're piling it out, if individual olives are falling down while you're forming these heaps, it's not shchicha. That's an important point, because it really impacts the work process. Gemara explains why this is so. Gemara reads, what difference is there between olive heaps and individual olives? Olive heaps are fully processed for transport to the main pile, whereas individual olives are not processed for transport to the individual pile. In other words, they're saying that, if he forgets to collect one or two individual olives when you're forming these heaps, it's not shchicha. So the Mishnah, was talking about shchicha of olive heaps that were forgotten during the collection process, and now it's going to present the law of shchicha of attached olives that were forgotten when the trees were harvested. So this story has come up before. It's going to come up again now. And it's going to come up another time later on in Masechet Peah. So this story is 3 times in Masechet Peah. Rabbi Hoshaya says, I was once treading olives with Rabbi Chia the Great, and he told me the following law. Even after you have finished plucking an olive tree, any remaining olive that you can stretch out your hand and take from the harvested tree is not shchicha. An opposing opinion. Rabbi Yochanan said, as soon as one has passed beyond the tree and forgotten its remaining produce, it is rendered shchicha. So this has come up before, just like shchicha for grain applies not only to sheaves that were forgotten during the gathering process, it's also going to apply when you're collecting for fruit trees, just like olives and carobs. And it's going to apply both. Just like grain, it's going to apply to both detached produce that's forgotten during the gathering process, as well as the attached produce that was forgotten during the harvesting process. So that's really a key point in this Mishnah and this Gemara, to try to show us that there is a similarity between. It's trying to draw the similarity between, hey, the laws over here for grain, that what we were talking about is the same for laws of trees. So very important to keep in mind, because you have olive trees all over the place. What are you going to do with them? What's the law? So this is the law. Mishnah stated, 2 fallen grapes are parrot, but 3 are not parrot. The Gemara cites a ruling that will be contrasted with the ruling of the Mishnah. Rabbi Lazar said in the name of Rabbi Chia the Great, a half cluster that broke off from the bunch is parrot. There's an alternative version of this ruling in another Beraisa. Rabbi Chia taught in a Beraisa, and this version, by the way, is Rabbi Chia's view, is going to be presented in this other Beraisa, not by Rabbi Lazar, but by an anonymous Amorah. We don't know who it is. This anonymous Amara is disputing the version of Rabbi Lazar that is in this other version, this first version. Alternatively, um, the Gemara could be looking at it like that, recording this so that it could show that um, what that this universally that this anonymous one is universally accepted. So the first Bereshit says like this, says Rabbi Lazar, again not anonymous, not an anonymous Amara, said in the name of Rabbi Chia the Great, the half cluster that broke off from the bunch is parrot, and the alternate version of the Bereshit says Rabbi Chia taught a Bereshit, a half cluster that broke off from the bunch, or an entire cluster that fell and all its grapes became detached is parrot. So by putting in, by the way, that is going to be the halacha lemaisa. If you look in the Rambam's Hilchos Matanos Aniyim, chapter 4:16, that's what's going to be the case if it breaks apart like this with these clusters. But I think the point of putting in the one that is not anonymous before the one that is anonymous is to show that the Academy looks at this Bereshit as being authoritative. The Gemara is going to ask, but the Mishnah taught 2 fallen grapes are parrot, but 3 are not parrot. How then can Rabbi Chia say that parrot applies to a half cluster and possibly even a disintegrated whole cluster, which comprises many more than 3 grapes? And the Gemara is going to answer that. Rabbi Imi said in the name of Rabbi Chia that the Mishnah is referring to the standard case of grapes that were dislodged from a cluster when it was being cut from the vine. And there, the law is that 1 or 2 fallen grapes are parrot, but 3 or more are not. And Gemara reads, the ruling of Rabbi Chia pertains to one who severed the clusters and placed them under the vine. And when collecting them, discovered that some produce has separated from the clusters. Basically, what we can see from the Rosh Cirillo is that Rabbi Chia is teaching that in this case where the separation occurred after the clusters had already been placed on the ground, the law of parrot is not limited to 1 or 2 grapes or even a half cluster or loose grapes, and this must be left to the poor. Perhaps so that we're going back to Rabbi Chia, his statement from the anonymous Amara and Rabbi Lazar, perhaps you could look at it like this way, where maybe there's no disagreement at all between what Rabbi Chia said. The only difference is, perhaps you could look at it in terms of this is happening at this period of time and this is happening at that period of time, in which case there's no contradiction at all. It's just a question of at what period of time did this break off. So the Mishnah's first ruling that 3 forgotten sheaves are not shigga, and the Gemara is going to ask about this, and we're going to get into Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. If 3 sheaves are arranged in the form of a branch protruding from a tree, Gemara reads, they do not combine with one another in order to constitute a row that is exempt from shigga. In other words, it's asking a question. It's saying, if 3 sheaves were arranged in the form of a branch protruding from a tree, do they combine with one another in order to constitute a row that is exempt from shigga? And the Gemara is going to answer that. I mean, here's what it says. It says, Menachem said in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, they indeed combine with one another to form a shkika exempt row, provided that the middle sheaf evenly bisects the others. That is, it must lie at an equidistant from the other 2 sheaves adjacent to it. Mara Fulda is explaining this and saying, when the middle sheaf is situated on the halfway line between the sheaves that precede and follow it, it is evident that the middle sheaf actually belongs in the row between the 2 sheaves, but was accidentally positioned at the side. If, however, the out-of-line sheaf is closer to one of the adjacent sheaves than it is to the other, it does not give the appearance of being part of the row, and therefore does not combine with the other two sheaves to qualify for a 3-sheaf exemption. So that's a way to look at this gamma as well, and another way to explain it, so that if it's too far, then it wouldn't be counted, and if it's close enough, you could be counting it. That's another way to read this. The Mishnah is going to conclude, and it's going to talk about Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai. Gemara reads, these rulings that Shchicha, Parrot, and Leket apply to 2 units but not 3 are in accordance with the opinion of Bet Hillel. But concerning all of them, Bet Shammai says 3 belong to the poor and 4 belong to the owner. Where on earth are these guys getting this from? Here's where. Rabbi Avin said, Bet Shammai's source is in the verse stated in the passage of Shchicha. In other words, go look in Devarim 24:19, and over there it says, the Torah says, you shall not return to take it for the proselyte, convert basically, the orphan, and for the widow it shall be. Basically what this is showing is that they're saying that, hey, this verse shows that the law of Shchicha applies even if enough sheaves were forgotten that they could be divided among 3 people. Who are the 3 people? 1 sheaf could be for the convert, 1 could be for the orphan, and 1 could be for the widow. And basically what it's showing is that only if 4 more sheaves were forgotten do they remain the owners. You see how amazing that is? He's going back, they're reading, Bet Shammai is reading the Torah there, and in the part talking about Shchicha, he looks at it, there's 3 classes of people. There's the convert, the orphan, and the widow. And he's saying that, hey, there has to at least be three in the row. 1 for the one that could be taken by the convert, 1 by the orphan, and 1 by the widow. And then the 4th one, that would be, if there's 4 more sheaves that are forgotten, that still remains to the owner. Bet Hillel's source is going to be in Leket and Peah. That is in Leviticus 19:10. And he's reading it over there that for the poor person and the convert, you shall leave them. And this verse mentions just 2 people, basically just the poor person and the convert. And this verse mentions 2 people, which is going to imply that the law of Leket and Peret are applicable when there are, 2 fallen stalks or grapes, 1 for the poor person and 1 for the convert, but not when there are 3 or more. And that's how they're deriving it. Bet Hillel is deriving it from the Torah verse where it's talking about Leket and Peah. And over there are 2 classes of people that are talked about, the poor and the convert. But over there, Bet Shammai is getting it out of Devarim, where it's talking about Shchicha. And over there, you see there are 3. There is the convert, the orphan, and the widow. And because there's 3, there has to be 3 stalks, 3 sheaves, 3 piles. So here's an alternate explanation of this dispute. Rabbi Manna, this might be the Rabbi Manna who was the head of the academy, one of the later or last Amorim in the Yerushalmi Shas. Rabbi Manna said both of them, Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, expounded this one verse stated in the passage of Shchicha as the source of their respective opinions. Gemara reads, for the convert, for the orphan, and for the widow it shall be. Bet Shammai says the Gemara, that the verse means when there is a set of 3 forgotten sheaves, 1 for the proselyte, 1 for the orphan, and 1 for the widow, it shall be for the poor. And Bet Hillel says that the verse's intent is exactly the opposite, that when there is a set of 3 forgotten sheaves, it shall be for the owner, and only when there are just 1 or 2 sheaves must they be left for the poor. Basically, Bet Hillel is explaining this verb in the Torah, yehiyeh, it shall be as connoting that it shall remain in its original state. You can find a parallel for this in Bavli Arachin 5a, and the verse, the way that Beit Hillel is reading it, means that when there are 3 forgotten sheaves corresponding to the 3 people enumerated in the verse, the sheaves remain in the possession of the owner. And just want to point out the Vilna Gaon's reading on this. Vilna Gaon is actually amending the text, and he's fixing the text, he's editing the text, he's changing the text. And the Vilna Gaon rewrites it to say that Bet Shammai said that the orphan and the widow mentioned in the verse count as 2 separate recipients, which together with the convert constitute a total of 3. And he rewrites it to say that Bet Hillel says that the orphan and the widow count as only 1 recipient, bringing the total number, including the convert, to 2. That is, that Bet Hillel maintains that the connective letter Vav, and in this expression for the orphan and the widow, serves to indicate that there are 2 that are really to be read as 1 recipient. In other words, the Vilna Gaon is pointing out that in the Torah where it has this Vav between orphan and widow, that should be read as 1 person, 1 class of people. Read, says the Vilna Gaon, orphan and widow together as 1. Don't read it as 2. And that is the difference on how it is to be read according to the Vilna Gaon.